I'm Emily Hayes, 28 years old, just 3 days away from marrying the love of my life, the Donovan's son. Everything seemed perfect until his wealthy, arrogant parents dropped a prenup on the table with an ultimatum. Sign it, or there's no wedding. What they don't know is that behind my modest appearance stands a thriving tech company worth B9 million and a will that won't be bent so easily. Their smug smiles are about to come face to face with the only thing they truly value: money. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from. And if you love stories where the underdog flips the script, don't forget to hit like and subscribe so you can be here when those smug grins finally fade. If you asked anyone in my little town in Ohio to describe me, they'd probably say I'm the quiet one who keeps her head down and works hard. I grew up in a modest house with 2 school teacher parents who taught me the value of books, honesty, and earning your own way. No silver spoons, no trust funds, just simple dinners around the kitchen table and lessons about how character matters more than status. I run a small but growing online artisan marketplace app. At least, that's what people see on the surface. What most don't know, even Alex, the man who stole my heart, is that the app is exploding quietly in value. And tucked away in careful investments from my grandfather's inheritance, I have about $8 million in net worth. It sounds surreal when I say it, but to me, it's never been about flashing numbers or proving myself. I've always believed you shouldn't have to wear your success on your sleeve just to be taken seriously. When I met Alex at a local charity event for education, I didn't think twice about who he was. He was just the charming, funny guy pouring coffee next to me at the fundraiser booth. He made me laugh when he got whipped cream all over his shirt, and when he offered to walk me to my car afterward, I felt like I'd known him for years. Later, of course, I learned he was Alex Donovan from that Donovan family, the ones who owned half the supermarkets in the region. People whispered his last name like it was a golden ticket. But for me, Alex was just Alex. Falling in love with him was easy, natural even. What I didn't expect was how fast things got complicated once I met his parents. Victor and Elaine Donovan lived in a sprawling estate just outside town, the kind of place where the driveway is longer than the street I grew up on. I remember walking into their home for the first time, my palms sweaty but my smile steady, telling myself that love would be enough. Alex squeezed my hand before the introductions, like he could sense my nerves. Elaine's smile was polite, but her eyes told another story, measuring me, cataloging everything from the brand of my shoes to the way I held my fork at dinner. She asked about my work, but not in the way people usually do. It was more like she was testing me, dropping words like practical, as though what I did was sweet but insignificant. And Victor, well, he hardly looked at me when he asked questions. Most of the time, he talked about business, market expansions, real estate deals. When I tried to chime in, he'd nod politely and move on, like my words never landed. What stung the most were the little digs, the comments that slipped out dressed as jokes. Elaine laughed about how refreshing it must be for Alex to date someone who wasn't into luxury, someone who could make do with less. She said it in front of everyone at dinner, her crystal glass raised, and Alex, bless him, just tried to change the subject. I sat there, smiling tightly, even though inside I felt a lump forming in my throat. But the real gut punch came later that night. I was walking back from the kitchen when I overheard Victor talking to Elaine in the study. His voice was low but clear enough. She's charming, sure, small-town charm, but no real substance. Alex deserves someone who can stand on our level. He in, down, down. I froze. My cheeks burned, and for a moment I couldn't breathe. No real substance? He didn't know me. He didn't know the late nights I spent building code line by line, or the risks I'd taken to turn a tiny app into something thousands of people now relied on. He didn't know that the small-town girl, standing in his hallway, had quietly built an empire bigger than he could imagine. I wanted to burst into the room and throw the truth in his face, but I didn't. I walked back, silent, forcing myself to swallow the anger. Because this wasn't just about me, it was about Alex. He loved his family, and I wasn't going to let one overheard insult destroy what we were building together. Still, that night, lying awake staring at the ceiling, doubts started creeping in. Did Alex hear his father talk about me like that? Did he secretly agree? Would he ever see me for who I really was, or just who his family decided I was? And that's when I realized love might come easily, but respect? That would have to be fought for. Planning a wedding is supposed to be exciting, right? picking flowers, tasting cakes, imagining the moment you walk down the aisle. But for me, every step of the process felt like running an emotional marathon with weights tied to my ankles. We decided to host the ceremony in the town's historic community hall. It wasn't glamorous, but it was beautiful in that old, small-town way arched windows, polished wood floors, the kind of place that still held the echoes of generations of laughter and love. I thought it was perfect. Elaine didn't. From the very first fitting, she made it clear. "It's quaint," she said, her lips twitching like she was holding back a laugh. "But don't you think a Donovan wedding deserves something a bit more elevated?" I smiled, because what else could I do? But inside, I felt that familiar sting. She meant it as a compliment dressed up like a question, but it landed like a slap. And it didn't stop there. At the cake tasting, she raised an eyebrow at my choice of buttercream. "Budget savvy," she murmured to the baker, loud enough for me to hear. Victor, meanwhile, barely looked up from his phone during the tastings. It was as if I didn't exist, except when it was convenient to remind me I wasn't part of their world. And then there was the family dinner. God, I'll never forget that night. We were halfway through roasted chicken and potatoes when Elaine leaned over, her voice syrupy sweet, and announced, "Don't you worry about the wedding expenses, Emily. We'll take care of everything. It's the least we can do." She said it with a smile that could have fooled anyone who didn't know better. But I knew what she meant. She assumed my parents couldn't afford it. She assumed I couldn't. My fork froze halfway to my mouth. A dozen sharp comebacks flew through my mind, but I swallowed them all down with a sip of wine. I couldn't cause a scene. Not yet. Through all of it, Alex tried in his own quiet way to make things better. He'd squeeze my hand under the table or change the subject when Elaine pushed too hard. But here's the thing, he never really called them out. He'd tell me later, "That's just how they are, babe. Don't take it personally." Easy for him to say. He'd never had someone question whether he was enough, not in the way I was being questioned every single day. And part of me hated him for avoiding the fight. Another part loved him even more for trying to shield me, even if he didn't fully understand how deep it cut. So I threw myself into what I knew best, my work. Late nights at my laptop, lines of code glowing against the darkness, reminding me who I was outside of the Donovans. My app was expanding faster than I could keep up with new vendors signing up every week, investors sending quiet inquiries, numbers climbing higher than I dared to hope. Those hours gave me strength. Every click, every new feature I built was proof that I was more than the label Victor and Elaine slapped on me. Mia, my best friend since college, was my lifeline. She'd call me after fittings or dinners, and I'd spill everything, the snide comments, the looks, the way I bit my tongue until it practically bled. Mia never minced words. Screw them. You're stronger than this. You've got nothing to prove." And I'd laugh, because she was right, but also because she didn't have to sit across from Elaine and pretend buttercream wasn't apparently beneath the Donovan legacy. But deep down, I was proud of myself. Proud that I hadn't broken, that I could walk out of those dinners with my head still high, even if my heart was sore. I told myself, just get through the wedding. Just focus on Alex. Love is what matters. Still, there were cracks forming. Little moments where Alex would mention family traditions, like asset protections or prenups, brushing it off as casual conversation. I'd nod and let it slide, but the words lodged in my chest like splinters. I couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger was coming, something they weren't telling me. And I was right. 3 days before the wedding, that's when it all came crashing down. I thought I was heading to the Donovans' house for a quick check-in, some last-minute detail Elaine wanted to discuss about seating charts or flowers. But the second I walked into that grand living room, with its cold marble floors and intimidating oil paintings staring down at me, I knew something was off. Victor was already seated in his leather chair like a king holding court, and Elaine perched beside him with a stack of papers neatly arranged on the coffee table. "Emily, sit," Victor said. "Not would you like to sit, just sit." My stomach tightened. Elaine smiled, the kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes. We wanted to go over a small formality before the big day, nothing to worry about. And that's when Victor slid the papers toward me. A prenup. At first glance, I thought, okay, this is normal. Rich families do this kind of thing. But then I started reading. page after page of legal jargon that boiled down to one thing. If I married Alex, I would have no claim to their family's wealth. Fine, I didn't want it anyway. But hidden in the clauses, bold as daylight, was something that nearly made me choke. If our marriage ended, any rights to my own assets, my app, my intellectual property, even parts of my investments would be reevaluated and potentially tied to Donovan interests. In other words, I wasn't just being cut out, I was being stripped. Victor's voice was smooth, almost rehearsed. It's standard procedure, Emily. We can't take risks with the family business. You understand, don't you? I could feel my hands trembling as I held the papers. Understand? You're asking me to give up everything I've worked for, everything that's mine, just to marry your son. Elaine tilted her head, like a cat watching a trapped mouse. It's really in everyone's best interest. If you love Alex, this shouldn't matter. That broke me. My throat burned, my eyes stung, and I could barely get the words out. You think I'm here for your money? You think that's all I care about? Victor's expression hardened. Sign it, or there is no wedding. It's as simple as that. I walked out, papers clutched in my hand, tears blurring my vision. My heart wasn't just broken, it was shredded. And for the first time, I wasn't even sure who I was angrier at, them or Alex for not warning me. When I confronted him that night, Alex looked like he'd been caught in a storm without an umbrella. I knew they'd want something like this, he admitted, running a hand through his hair. But I didn't know the details. I didn't want to upset you before the wedding. That was worse than the prenup itself. You knew? My voice cracked. And you didn't tell me? He tried to take my hand, but I pulled away. For the first time, I saw the weakness in him, the boy who'd always let his parents dictate the rules. And for a split second, I wondered if I'd been wrong to believe he'd ever stand beside me as an equal. That night, I sat alone at my kitchen table, staring at the prenup. Rage coursed through me, but underneath it was something else. Clarity. I wasn't going to be the small-town girl they could push around. Not anymore. The next morning, I called my lawyer, Harold. He was calm, steady, the kind of man who'd seen enough battles to know when someone was bluffing. Emily, he said, sliding the papers across his desk, this isn't just unfair, it's predatory. If they want to play this game, you have to show them who they're dealing with. So we did. 2 days later, I sat across from Victor and Elaine at an upscale diner in town. Not their home turf this time, but neutral ground. Alex was beside me, silent but tense, twisting his napkin into knots. Victor looked smug. Elaine poised, like they were waiting for me to fold. I didn't fold. I brought something for you, I said, sliding my own folder across the table. My voice was steady now, sharper than they'd ever heard. Inside were financial statements, valuation reports, investment portfolios, all proof of what I'd built and what my grandfather had left me. Elaine's smile slipped the moment she saw the numbers. Victor's jaw tightened, eyes flicking over the pages. $8 million. My app's growth projections. Investors lined up, waiting. I wasn't just surviving. I was thriving. You wanted to protect your assets? I leaned forward, meeting Victor's eyes dead on. So do I. I will sign a prenup, but it will be fair. Equal. Because I'm not the one who needs protecting, here you are. For the first time, Victor had no words. Elaine shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her face pale. Alex finally looked up, pride flickering in his eyes as if he was really seeing me for the first time. And me? I felt something I hadn't felt since this whole mess began. Power. I wasn't the girl they thought I was, and I was done letting them write my story. The night after that diner showdown, I didn't sleep a wink. Not because I was scared anymore, but because I felt like my whole life had split into 2 chapters. Before that moment, and after. Before, I was the girl who just wanted to belong, who thought love alone could smooth over every jagged edge. After, I was someone who finally understood that belonging isn't worth it if you have to shrink yourself down to fit someone else's mold. Alex showed up at my apartment just after sunrise, hair messy, shirt untucked, eyes heavy like he hadn't slept either. He stood at my door holding 2 coffees, like he thought caffeine might fix everything. "Can we talk?" he asked softly. I let him in, but I kept my guard up. The silence between us was heavy, and I could feel his guilt rolling off him in waves. He set the coffees on the counter and rubbed the back of his neck. "Emily, I'm sorry. I should have been stronger. I should have told them to back off. I hate that I let it get this far. Part of me wanted to melt into his arms, to believe him, to let the love I had for him erase all the cracks. But another part, the louder part, wasn't sure I could trust him to protect me or even stand beside me when it really mattered. I'm not marrying your parents, Alex, I said quietly, staring at him over the rim of my coffee cup. I'm marrying you, but if you can't separate yourself from them, then what future do we even have? He sat down, his shoulders sagging like the weight of his whole life was pressing down on him. You're right, he whispered. I've been living in their shadow for so long, I don't even know who I am without them. But when you stood up to them yesterday, I realized that's the kind of strength I need in my life. That's who I want to build a life with. His words should have filled me with hope, but instead they left me torn. Was this just another promise he couldn't keep, or was this the first time he was truly breaking free? The next few days blurred together calls from wedding planners asking for confirmation, whispers from friends wondering if everything was still on, texts from relatives already arriving in town. On the outside, it looked like a wedding was still happening. On the inside, it felt like a war zone. Then came the phone call I wasn't expecting. Elaine, her voice, usually so sharp and polished, sounded thinner this time. Emily, she said, pausing as if swallowing her pride took effort. I may have misjudged you. I almost laughed out loud. You think? She sighed, and for the first time, I caught something human in her tone. Victor was furious. He thinks you embarrassed us. But I saw something in you yesterday I didn't want to admit. You're not just some small-town charity case Alex dragged home. You're more than that. And I can't stop this wedding, even if I wanted to. It wasn't an apology, not really. But it was the closest I'd ever get from Elaine. And honestly, that was enough for me to realize I didn't need her approval anymore. The real question wasn't about them, it was about Alex. Did I believe he could stand up for us? For me, when the next storm hit? That night, we sat together on the balcony of my apartment, the city lights stretching out like a sea of fireflies. He reached for my hand, his thumb brushing against my skin. I don't want to lose you, Emily. I don't care about the prenup, the money, the family name. I just want you. And I believed him not fully, not blindly, but enough to give us a chance, enough to let the story keep unfolding. Because maybe real love isn't about perfect trust right away. Maybe it's about choosing each other, even when the ground is shaking beneath your feet. The wedding didn't happen the way it was originally planned. We called off the grand ballroom, the string quartets, the endless guest list filled with people who didn't care about us. Instead, we gathered just a handful of the people who mattered, our friends, my family, even a few of Alex's cousins who genuinely loved him. We said our vows in a small garden lit with fairy lights, nothing fancy, but everything real. And as I looked into his eyes that night, I realized something. I hadn't just fought for my place in his life. I had redefined my own. I wasn't the girl desperate to be accepted anymore. I was a woman who knew her worth and who would never, ever let anyone take it away again. The Donovans didn't win. But it wasn't even about winning anymore. It was about finally seeing that I'd been holding the pen to my own story all along. Months later, life looked different, but not in the way I'd once imagined. The grand, shiny Donovan name never really embraced me, and honestly, I stopped caring if it did. What mattered was how Alex and I started shaping a life that actually felt like ours. We moved into a modest place just outside the city. Nothing extravagant, but it had this little sunlit kitchen where I could drink my coffee in peace every morning, and that alone felt like freedom. Alex started therapy, something he never thought he'd do, and it cracked him open in ways I didn't expect. He began to see how much of his identity had been tied to his parents' control, and how deeply he'd let that shadow creep into our relationship. Watching him take ownership of that, it gave me hope that maybe love can grow stronger when both people choose to change, not just one. The Donovans? They stayed the same, polished, cold, and calculating. They showed up at holidays with stiff smiles and half-hearted small talk, but the sharp edges between us never softened. And that was fine. I stopped measuring my worth by how much approval I could wring out of them. Because the truth is, some people will never clap for you, no matter how much you give, and chasing their applause only makes you forget who you really are. What surprised me most was how my own family responded. At first, they were worried, protective, ready to step in if Alex hurt me again. But over time, they saw the shifts, the small ways he stood beside me, the times he put me before his parents, and they gave us room to grow, room to rebuild. That grace meant everything. Looking back now, I think the biggest lesson wasn't about love or marriage, it was about voice. For years, I kept quiet to avoid conflict, to smooth things over, to be the easy person in the room. But when I finally spoke up, when I demanded to be seen, something unlocked in me. I realized I'd been carrying the pen to my own story the whole time. I just had to stop letting other people write the chapters for me. I won't lie and say it's been perfect. There are still days when old doubts creep in, when I wonder if the Donovans are just waiting for me to trip. But now, instead of shrinking, I remind myself of that night in the diner, the night I refused to be silenced. That's the version of me I carry forward, the one who chooses truth over pretense, worth over approval, strength over silence. And if there's one thing I hope anyone listening to this takes away, it's this. You don't need permission to stand tall in your own life. You don't need a rich family's blessing, or a flawless past, or even universal love from everyone in the room. What you need is the courage to draw a line, to say, this is who I am, and I will not be erased. Because sometimes the real happily ever after isn't about castles or family names, it's about finally seeing yourself clearly and refusing to settle for anything less than respect. And that's a love story worth telling. Sometimes the hardest battles we face aren't loud or visible, they're the quiet wars against silence, doubt, and the need for others' approval. This story reminds us that dignity and self-worth don't come from a family name, money, or applause. They come from the courage to speak up, to set boundaries, and to see our own value even when others refuse to. As the saying goes, true gold fears no fire. And it's often through the flames of conflict and rejection that our truest strength is revealed. When we stop chasing the love that is withheld and start honoring the love we carry within, life begins to feel lighter, freer, and more authentic. If this reflection touched something in you, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below, maybe even share a moment when you found your own voice. And if this story gave you perspective or hope, please like the video and subscribe so you won't miss more heartfelt journeys like this. Until next time, may you walk forward with courage, surrounded by peace, and always remember you are stronger, braver, and more worthy than you think.